Good evening and welcome to Gamma A3 Economic News Live. Malaysia's economy depends heavily on the semiconductor industry, especially in exports and manufacturing. Recently, global demand for semiconductors has slowed due to weaker electronics and smartphone sales around the world. So what does this mean for Malaysia's economy? More specifically, how will it affect aggregate expenditure and national income? To discuss this issue, we are joined today by our trade expert, industry expert, and macroeconomists. Let's first look at the impact on Malaysia's export with our trade expert.
Let's start with the external trade. Net exports are an important part of aggregate expenditures, and this is especially important in Malaysia because our economy depends heavily on semiconductor and also electronics industry. According to the Malaysian Investment Development Authorities, the E&E sector contributed nearly 40% of Malaysia's total export in 2024. At the same time, Bank Negara Malaysia reports that around 64% of Malaysia's E&E exports are related to semiconductor. This shows that Malaysia is highly exposed to the change in global semiconductor demand. So, when global demand for semiconductors slows down, especially from major markets such as the US and also China, Malaysia is directly affected. For example, according to MEDA, foreign companies begin placing fewer orders for chips and electronic components. As global semiconductors sales weakens in 2023, Malaysia's E&E exports also recorded slower performance and compared to the strong growth seen in 2022. So, this means that export-oriented firms in Malaysia start earning less revenue, especially firms involved in semiconductor manufacturing and supply chain. So, this led to a fall in exports, while imports remain relatively stable in the short run. So, net exports decrease. Overall, weaker global semiconductor demand reduced Malaysia's export performance and slowed down the economic activity in the short run.
Thank you. So, we see that a decline in global semiconductor demand reduces Malaysia's export and puts pressure on aggregate expenditure. But how does this affect firms and their investment decisions? Let's now hear from our industry expert.
Now, let's look at the investment side of the economy in Malaysia. The private investment is also a key component of aggregate expenditure. In Malaysia's case, investment in the semiconductor and electronics sector is highly sensitive to the expected demands and the future profits. According to the World Economic Forum, Malaysia has attracted significant foreign direct investment in its semiconductor industry, especially in the Penang, where the global firms has been expanding the operations. This reflects a strong long-term confidence in Malaysia's role in global supply chains. However, this confidence is closely tied to global demand conditions. When the global semiconductor demand weakens, the firms in Malaysia's electronic and electrical sectors start to receive fewer expect orders and lower the sales forecast. Firms become more cautious because they expect weaker future sales and profits. As a result, the firms in Malaysia tend to delay their expansion project, reduce the capital expenditure on machinery, and propose the long-term investment plan. We can already see this pattern in the multinational firms operating in Malaysia. For example, Intel has adjusted and delayed part of its expansion plan for its advanced packaging facility in Malaysia in response to the global semiconductor conditions. This shows how the investment decisions are not only based on the current sales, but also on expectations about the future demands. So when the confidence falls, the private investment in Malaysia declines. From a macroeconomic perspective, this reduces aggregate expenditure and slows down the growth of future productive capacity, which also delays the economic recovery in the short run.
Thank you. So both external trade and business investment are slowing down. But what does this mean for Malaysia's overall economy and national income? Let's now hear from our macroeconomists.
Now, let's examine the overall impact on Malaysia's economy. Malaysia's national income in the short run is determined by aggregate expenditure. From what we have seen, both net exports and private investment have declined due to a weaker global semiconductor demand. This causes aggregate expenditure to fall. According to the Keynesian income expenditure model, when aggregate expenditure falls, equilibrium national income also falls, because the output is driven by demand in the short run. We can already see the sign of this in Malaysia's recent performance. In 2023, export declined for several consecutive months, mainly driven by the E&E sectors, accounting for around 44% of total exports. As export-oriented firms earn less, income in the production chain also weakens. This affects workers and households, leading to a lower spending in the economy. This also creates a multiple effect, where an initial fall in export and investment lead to a larger overall decline in national income. This helps explain why Malaysia's economic growth slowed significantly in 2023 compared to the previous year. While domestic demand still supports growth, weaker exports clearly act as a drag on overall performance. Overall, the decline in global semiconductor demand reduced Malaysia's net export and investment, lower aggregate expenditure, and through the multiple effect, leads to a fall in national income in the short run.
To sum up, weaker global demand for semiconductors has reduced Malaysia's exports and slowed down private investment. This leads to lower aggregate expenditure in the economy, and as a result, national income is affected in the short run through the multiplier effect. That's all for tonight's economic report. Thank you for watching Gamma A3 Economic News Live.